feel like that's relatable.
That's a good opening for the podcast.
Gaga ball.
The first court thing of anything that I went to, Ron, you sent us when I was in mock trial at Bamieh High School. You sent us to go look at cases, and the case was of, I'll get the details all wrong, but it was like a Little League baseball thing where a kid was being bullied, and a father had stepped in and like hit the kid that was bullying his kid, and that was what the trial was about. And I just remember being in there and just being very impressed.
I sent you to the courthouse unchaperoned, or was I with you?
Unchaperoned.
Wow.
Are we still recording all this? This
That's
feels
a
like
little
No, you need to tell
it
me.
needs to be deleted.
I mean, maybe my memory is wrong and I was 18 years old, but can you be 16 years old and go?
If you look old,
watch
I mean,
trials?
the bailiff has to stop you. I did, but I was working in the DA's office.
I must have done something to get some kind of clearance. I can't imagine it to say.
Maybe you went with me. Maybe you were there.
Maybe.
But do you remember this trial though?
Vaguely. I remember.
Yeah.
I think I know who the defendant is too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
This must be relatively common. One of my first trials was the issue where the dad came in and had found his daughter in a room with some guys, and he didn't like what was going on.
So he had like the whole like shotgun dad thing.
He pounded, or just cracked some skulls
I
and
can relate that.
tossed them out.
So, David, did you hear that the Girls We Hate school is closing?
The Girls We Hate School. Which school would that be?
Lorena. Remember how we used to call
Yeah.
them?
Oh, yeah.
So I call them GWS, girls, GWH.
It still trips me out that you went to go work for the enemy and coach this team for so many years.
My daughter was on the team.
Yeah, only because
even
you
helped coach.
ruthlessly wanted some victories under your belt.
It was much easier there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're closing?
They're closing.
The school is done.
Last year, June 30th, they close.
Wow. Well, I'm glad to have everyone here together. In the attic. It feels like there's a joke there, that, like what happens when a bunch of lawyers get in an attic, but I guess we'll find out. I know we got a lot of things going on right now, but the thing that I wanted to ask all of you about is what we all were talking about, not just in my law class last night, but in the news everywhere, nationally and internationally, is this case of cannabis-induced psychosis in our county. Actually, the sentencing was yesterday or 2 days ago.
I think it was 2 days
ago. A couple of days ago. And it's in the news right now. And I think people are upset one way or the other about what happened. Let me just, I brought up the news so I can get the actual details of this case very quickly. It happened in Thousand Oaks between two young people, and a woman named Bryn Spiker, who's now 32. This was 6 years ago. This is in 2018. She was sentenced yesterday to just 2 years of probation and 100 hours of community service for the crime of killing her boyfriend, or the man she was dating. And the hook of the whole story is that she had consumed marijuana, and that was her defense. I think the main detail that I think is important that we were all talking about is the fact that they brought experts in to sort of testify that she stabbed this man in the midst of this psychosis that was generated by smoking marijuana. And both the defense and then the prosecutor's own experts both testified and confirmed that was like a correct theory.
Right. But just so it's clear that her defense was basically insanity.
Okay.
That she couldn't form an intent, not insanity because she didn't go for complete not guilty. She went for involuntary manslaughter. So she said she couldn't form the intent to kill, which is, you can not form intent to kill for a lot of reasons. One of them can be some form of temporary psychosis, which she claims. And by the way, reading the reports of the trial, my technical opinion would be, she seemed like she was batty and somewhat touched with crazy.
She stabbed herself like 20 times in the neck, her own neck.
The details are really, really gruesome of this case. When the police arrived, and I think there's body cam footage of this, she was like in the midst of stabbing him. She killed her dog. She stabbed herself. And our professor, who is also a local judge, told us that he had witnessed the body cam footage and said it was like watching The Exorcist. It was like seeing someone just completely possessed. Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think there was an issue of her mental state. Even the cops thought she was nuts. I talked to one officer who responded, and I asked him about it, and he said, yeah, she was off her rocker. So I don't think that was ever the issue. I do believe the DA probably didn't charge the case correctly. And I think the DA is relying on, there's a theory in law, not a theory, an instruction you get that voluntary intoxication can't be in a defense in most cases. So like if you go out and get drunk and then do something stupid, you can't say, well, I got drunk.
Right.
Like you can say, but however, if you think you're just smoking, let's say, well, I'm not going to say smoking. We did a case like this a while back for a psychiatrist who had pills in his closet, his medicine cabinet, and they were going on vacation. And he took the pills and he put them in a green bottle of some kind, like nondescript bottle, so he can bring them. We don't want to put Ambien on the outside of a bottle. So when he gets back home, his girlfriend, wife, put the Ambien pills into his blood pressure medication. And so then he took Ambien thinking it was blood pressure medication. And then he got in a car and then he got a DUI for under the drugs. And so the defense was that it wasn't voluntary intoxication. It was an accidental. Therefore, he has a defense because he had no intent to do any of that stuff. And the DA dumped the DA dumped the case, and we were able to show the bottles and everything like that in the witness's testimony. They couldn't prove it.
And here in the audiologist's case, the woman who was tried, wasn't there evidence that her boyfriend had given her something? So it may have been more than just marijuana or THC?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I think the allegation that I've heard is that it was salvia divinorum, a drug that is much more psychedelic in its properties, and that for a while you could just get it at gas stations anywhere in America. The stuff is insane and launches you into a totally different reality. In fact, there's a whole YouTube world of people doing this drug at parties and like kind of losing their minds. So it seems like in line with what she did. And it's also, I think they've made the defense a little bit that there was an element of involuntary intoxication, because
that would be involuntary intoxication.
Right.
If she was given a drug without her knowledge,
right,
then that would be involuntary intoxication.
And yet, what do we say to seems like the 90% of the American public that look at a case like this and they're just like shaking their head? Because it's kind of, I don't know if you guys read like all the like New York Post and Fox News stuff, but it was like typical California liberal judge, like letting someone go for savage murder. How do you guys react to that sort of stuff?
You got to look at the facts.
Yeah.
Or you point out
that's
we're in
inconvenient for some people, but yeah, based on the facts.
I would just say we're in Ventura County, and if you pulled your head out of your butt, you would realize that that's not the case here. This is one of the. I will say that if you can convince a Ventura County jury to acquit somebody on that defense, the evidence has to be substantial. Like we have tough juries here. They're very pro law enforcement. They're very anti-crime. I could tell you that you don't get much benefit of the doubt as a defense attorney in Ventura County.
Right.
And the judge who heard the case, I don't know even who it was.
Worley.
Oh, okay. Well. Well, he's not a liberal guy by any stretch of the imagination, and he just applies the law. Sometimes incorrectly, in my opinion, but he just applies the law.
So, I mean, I think it was the victim, Chad O'Melia. It was his father had the money quote that was all over all the headlines this week, in which he said something like, "Well, that judge just gave anyone a license to kill in California because you can just get stoned and savagely murder someone with a knife." And it feels like, it seems that, do you understand that people do feel that way?
Well, I know, but that stems from not understanding the law or the facts of the case, because you can't just go out and I can't just take a bunch of edibles that I voluntarily do and do the same thing and get that same result. Like
right.
It's such a specific fact pattern that is inconvenient for people to understand, because that's not a great soundbite.
Well, I mean,
that's true.
Look at the defendant, though. Like, the woman was, by all accounts, a decent person, no criminal record, no history of any kind of violence.
A doctor.
Was a taxpayer, no problems. And all of a sudden, she's just going to snap and kill the guy for no reason. But I'm not defending. I don't know enough about the case to have an opinion. I do know that a case like that, to get that result, had to be very compelling. And the news accounts, at least of what the evidence that was presented, seemed pretty compelling. When somebody's stabbing themselves.
Yeah.
I had a case when I was a prosecutor where this guy did horrible things to this woman in terms of beating her. and just was acting all kinds of goofy, and then took his own feces and smeared it all over his body.
That's not normal behavior.
Well, and the cop said to me what I thought. I go, oh, he's nuts. And he goes, why would you think that? I go, once you go to that level, I'm giving you nuts.
Could we apply some common sense to the situation?
I'm not going to prosecute a guy who does that like he's not insane.
Yeah. But to your point, this is why our system does not allow the family members of victims to decide the outcome of a case or punishment.
Yeah. Well, we've all three of us have talked about that individually, about the sort of emotional bias of that part of it. I mean, it brings up the idea of like I'm thinking of like, what was it, Michael Dukakis running for president in like 1988. I think his opponent in the Republican Party, it wasn't Bush, it was someone like that who asked basically, if your daughter were raped and murdered, would you support the death penalty? And he had kind of a like liberal answer where he was like, oh, well, I don't know. You'd have to look at the individual case. And Americans just rejected that solidly. It was just kind of like a vengeance culture. And it seems like that's part of what you guys are
it's like
describing.
It's human.
I think in that case, they were saying that he should have given a human answer and he gave a political answer.
Right.
That's why they didn't like him. Because somebody said that to me, and I'm against the death penalty, but I'd be for it in that situation.
Sure.
100%. And I would have no problem with it. But he gave the political answer to be consistent with what he's been saying, which was not the right answer, obviously.
Right. It's dumb. You can distinguish the situation. You're talking about my family, not talking about a piece of public policy.
Look, there was a kid who pushed my son the other day, and I wanted the death penalty for him. Okay.
You're going to get it. You could lobby to change the laws, maybe.
Maybe not the death penalty, but just a severe beating penalty.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it. I mean, it feels like that's what you see on the like New York Post comments or whatever, is like that reaction. That sort of like just baseline.
Well,
I hate this person.
You put enough computers in front of enough idiots. You get a lot of opinions.
Does her? I guess I'm kind of wanting to know like how much her character actually matters, right? Because it seems like what you're saying is, well, she's this smart girl. Like you wouldn't expect this. In other words, we could look at another person who did this and be like, well,
I can tell you,
obviously they would do this.
A couple things that helped her. One, she's a professional. Two, she's somewhat attractive. Three, she has no criminal history and she had the full support of her family.
Yeah.
When a jury looks at somebody like that, it's hard to imagine them doing something like she did with a rational mind. And it's just, I always say I'd much rather be sitting next to an attractive professional defendant than, puppet from the colonia.
Right, okay? Right.
There's a difference there.
Is it obviously it seems like a challenge when your client is unsympathetic? Have you guys had to deal with this in your lives?
Yeah, this morning. Let's not publish the date of this.
No.
Yes, many times.
Yeah. We're human. So we're judging people based on what we see and all of these snap assumptions that we make and assumptions we make throughout trial, sitting next to someone. It's why we say that, hey, someone's not going to get a constitutional fair shot at a trial if they are in custody in jail and we don't allow them to dress in normal plain clothes. Normal plain clothes being, something nice like a collared shirt and a vest, as opposed to just a t-shirt and shorts. Because you get judged based on what you're wearing, your posture, your face, whether or not if you're in custody and you're accused of a violent crime and they don't want to give you like a real pen to write with, so you have to write with a short little pencil nub.
Which reminds me of the Menendez brothers trial. Do you guys remember the old celebrity
sweaters.
trial? Mm-hmm. The sweaters, yeah, exactly. Her name was Leslie Abramson.
Mm-hmm.
God, where did that name come from? That's a blast from the past. But yeah, the idea to me is like kind of wondering like how you accomplish that, and if it gives you hesitation to even take a client on if it seems like they have a case legally, but they're not sympathetic people, and that might.
Let's take that example there. Here's the thing: like, I had a case one time where my guy was an alleged gang member. It was in Santa Barbara, and in court he would wear sweaters and shirts and things like nice clothes. Mm-hmm. And the police officer testifying, saying, "Hey, do you see the defendant here in court?" And he said, "Well, I see somebody who looks like the defendant. He wasn't dressed like that when I saw him last." And he's sitting over there next to Mr. Bamieh. And so on cross-examination, I said, "Hey, did you see me? I just saw that same police officer 2 days earlier looking at evidence. I go, did you see me 2 days earlier? And he goes, yeah. And I go, how was I dressed? And he goes, jeans and a t-shirt. And I go, and today I'm all dressed up. And he goes, yeah. And I go, why is that? And he goes, well, you're in court. And I go, well, isn't my client in court? Didn't you get dressed for court? Don't we all try to look good in court?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, what's the difference between him and you and me? We all get dressed up for court. So that's how I counter that every time, is that I point out that everybody gets dressed up for court. That's what you expect. If you don't, you're an idiot.
I think it's the Menendez brothers who just seem so manipulative because they were like dressed like little boys. And they had like colorful pastel little Sears sweaters on.
Well, like if you were my client in court, I'd tell you to shave your beard.
Yeah.
And I'd tell you to keep your sleeves on.
So people couldn't see my tattoos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I would. 100%. No doubt.
What do jurors think of tattoos?
I don't know, but I know it's not going to be a positive. There's a chance. I mean, there's not going to be nothing negative about you and that sweater.
Is there a sense that you could never win this though? Like you might like try to manipulate and try to like make your client look exactly this way, and it just like the jurors pick something else random about them.
Well, see, I don't look at it that way. I look at it as avoiding prejudice because okay, so does it make you any more guilty or not guilty if you have tattoos? No, but could there be somebody who thinks that? Yes.
Sure.
I'd like to avoid that problem and not have to think what they're thinking or try to have them make a decision based on something that's not the facts. So you're looking at it as me manipulating. I'm looking at it as I know that people have biases and have opinions, and I want to avoid that in my trial. So I don't look at it as manipulating. I look at it as avoiding a problem.
It's like the equivalent of driving a really boring car so that the cops don't pick you out or anyone can't pick you out. Yeah.
Well, this is why people don't buy red cars, right?
Also just curbing behavior. So the last trial I had a couple months ago, a juror wrote to the judge after the case was over, like, it would have been really nice if defense counsel, me, wasn't blocking our view of the defendant sometimes, because this juror thought, I was trying to somehow obscure like a guilty face.
Wow.
Or guilty mannerisms.
Yeah.
That's what the juror actually wrote in the letter. So it's you're going to get judged, and you're not going to necessarily know how people are going to read certain things. So you play to the odds.
Right. I mean, every time I've done jury service, and I've never been picked for a jury, but I'm always looking around the room and I'm like, these are the people like that I would depend on to like exonerate me. God forbid I'm ever accused of a crime. And it seems like it's so random in terms of who these people are and what their beliefs are. I mean, that's just
judges
America,
do it too, right? Jen's audience is a judge.
Yeah.
And you have to prepare your clients to curb their emotion, because it's a divorce or it's their kids.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the jury makes it harder because you don't always know, like we were talking about at lunch the other day, even with people who have been victims of a similar circumstance. Sometimes those people are even harder on the victims than somebody else would be. But yeah, if you're going in front of a judge and you know that they don't happen to like something about your client, I'm definitely trying to make sure that doesn't get pronounced in front of the judge in any way that I can, because they're all human.
And that can be like a visual thing or like an attitude thing.
Yes. Yeah, it can be both. And then it can also, I mean, it's more problematic when it's about the facts of the case, the specific facts that you just know are not going to be great, and trying to find the best way to explain that behavior or that situation.
And in Jen's world, they're dealing with mediators and evaluators all the time, and you also have to be careful how your client's viewed by the mediator or the child custody evaluator, and you want to coach them up in terms of maybe the proper demeanor to have in that situation. That'd probably be an accurate way to say it, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yeah, because, we're all judged anyway, but when there's somebody in the room whose specific job is to literally judge you and give a description of either your behavior, how you interact with your kids, all of these different things that have huge effects on the outcome of what your schedule is going to be when you're going to see your kids. You need to be more aware of what they're looking at and some of the things that you would maybe normally do that are just not going to be viewed in the most positive light.
Like, how many clients have you told not to roll their eyes during a hearing?
Many.
Oh,
so
God,
many.
I can
And I'm
imagine that.
unfortunately the worst offender of my own rule on that. But yeah, you're sitting at counsel table. Your ex is saying any number of horrible things about you and trying to not react because the judge is also looking at what the reaction is. Are you rolling your eyes? Are you being disrespectful? Is that going to be a problem for co-parenting going forward? Like all of those little things add up and you don't know which way that ends up going, but you try to protect them a little bit from themselves and from being a human. I mean, we're all human, but some of those things are viewed more harshly than others.
It sounds like, I mean, again, all my references are from the 90s, but the Jerry Springer show was like a form of family court that happened on a stage, and it was always just like
parentage case,
right? Yes, and you're always like there's paternity cases and all that kind of stuff, but you're always waiting for them to start fighting. Like that was the whole point of the show, was just to show this tension between these people, and it seems like the impulse in family court is actually the opposite. You're trying to like make it look like we all can actually get along.
Right. Well,
if that makes sense.
My impulse is to show that, and the court's preference is to show that. But on the client's end and the people who are in that courtroom, yeah, I mean, there have been days where it does feel close to being on a Jerry Springer set because somebody reacts in maybe an outsized way, but somebody reacts and that causes a chain reaction. In fact, this week I was in court and the people are testifying. I'm half paying attention because I'm just waiting until my case can get called. And I look up and there'd been some comments that were questionable. And all of a sudden there's 4 bailiffs in the courtroom when there's normally only 1. And I'm like, oh, somebody knows something about whatever is happening here that I missed, but they're prepared for. And nothing ended up happening, but the presence of the bailiffs, additional bailiffs, I'm sure helps that.
The closest thing we have to the Jerry Springer court is restraining order court, don't you think, Ralph?
Oh.
Well, I was going to say that I think the reason it's harsher in family law or restraining orders is because it's a lot more personal. Like if you're a criminal defendant, it's the cops who you don't really know saying you did bad stuff. Okay, well, you can live with that.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's your ex or your mother or people that you used to love and eat turkey with on Thanksgiving saying it, that really hurts.
People get restraining orders against their mothers.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they try.
Or their mothers get restraining orders against their kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is a restraining order really? It just means that you can like call the cops on people if they get too close to you.
You're prohibited for being in a certain vicinity near the person who has you restrained if they get it.
Or contacting them.
And there's 2 different types of restraining. There's domestic violence restraining order. There's a civil harassment. There's 3. And there's a civil harassment order. And there's an elder abuse restraining order. And the domestic violence restraining order, you have to have a kind of relationship, domestic relationship,
sure.
Not a violence relationship, like boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, child,
in-laws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a workplace harassment order. If 2 people need to continue to work together but need to be separated because they're adults.
Right. And so there's those.
Are most of them domestic though? Are most of them restraining order stuff?
You know what's wild is that it used to be that way, and then I am finding a lot more of these civil harassment orders are coming our way. And it's a lot of neighbors. And I think you were in court today. We're talking about she was in the elder.
Well, it was the elder abuse, but it was a bunch of neighbors using the elder abuse restraining order to basically try and resolve their neighbor dispute, and then the neighbor disputes are.
So, like, if I wanted to get a restraining order, let's say we were neighbors, no domestic violence, no domestic relationship between us, and I got pissed at you for whatever reason because you came on my lawn and your dog's been pooping on my lawn for weeks. Okay. In theory, if I could come up with a threat you made towards me, I can go get a temporary restraining order against you, because the way the judges look at it is like, hey, let me just separate these people and calm this thing down a bit, and then we can have a hearing and decide whether a permanent one should be issued. So for a period of 30 to 60 days, you can't come on my property or be within 50 to 100 yards of me.
Well, the temporary order is in place.
And then we have a hearing where I have to produce evidence to show that there's some either physical harm or threat of physical harm that's legit that would require me to have you restrained. Most of those things go away at that point because people way overestimate what constitutes a restraining order and what would justify a restraining order. However, there are occasions where the level of dickheadness is such that they are justified. And we had a case where we had our clients live next door to these neighbors, and these neighbors thought they got mad because our clients built a higher fence or something really silly. And they decided the way to deal with it was to play their music they got stereo speakers put outside their house and played it at full volume almost 24/7 for months.
But especially when they would leave the house, they would like crank it up and leave.
I feel like that kind of audio warfare is common in America. Well, that kind of like, we'll play our stereo. They did it on The Sopranos at one point.
They did that for the tortured prisoners too.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. But like and our client recorded it on his iPhone. We'll just say this is 10 p.m. on Tuesday night. His little girls couldn't sleep, and they were just having a hard time. And we ended up we had to do like a 4 or 5 day restraining order hearing on that thing. And the good news was they were into classic rock, which is the music I prefer. So the music wasn't bad.
AC/DC was in my head, actually. I was like, this is highway.
But like, not only did we get the restraining order, they had to pay attorney's fees, and now there's a civil suit pending. All because these people couldn't govern themselves in a way that was rational. But they were insane, and there was no living next door to them. It was impossible.
Most people, I feel like, because my parents deal with horrible neighbors for years and years, and they're always just like, what can we do? And I'm always like, there's maybe legal action? I don't really know. I feel like oftentimes neighbor disputes turn into harassment and violence, in part because people are just like, I'm going to solve this my own way. It's my home. And it turns into something even worse than it should be.
Yeah, that's why we have the restraining order process. So you don't have to solve it. You don't have to call Polly Walnuts.
That's right.
To do it.
Okay, I have a couple. You guys got to humor me. I have a couple cases I want to throw at you. First, before this one, maybe we can talk about Alec Baldwin really quickly, because that's back in the news right now. I'm surprised that they're charging him again. I don't know why. Because they had initially charged him, dropped the charges. What's you guys' take on this case? Because it feels like
there must be some evidence that he knew that gun was loaded.
Yeah.
That's what my take on it. I don't know what the evidence is. It's unclear. Mm-hmm. There has to be some evidence. If you point a loaded gun at somebody right away, you have a very strong argument for second-degree murder. They're not charging him with second-degree murder. They're charging him with involuntary, I believe. And I assume the law is the same. It's what, New Mexico? Where's that?
Arizona?
Arizona.
I think Arizona, yeah.
I assume the law is the same there as it is in California. And if it's involuntary, they're saying that he didn't intend to kill, but he did something basically really stupid that caused somebody's death.
It's a similar intent argument to what Ron was talking about earlier, where if you're drinking, and then later, or you intoxicate yourself to the point, and then later when you're intoxicated, when you don't have as much control, you're still responsible for that act as an intentional act.
Well, that'd be voluntary manslaughter, though, if that was the case.
And here, if you knew, as you were saying, that the gun was loaded and you pull the trigger, even if you don't intend to shoot somebody.
He denies even pulling the trigger and has always denied pulling the trigger.
So that's probably where they have some evidence that indicates he pulled the trigger.
I'm like, is it on a camera?
I don't know. I don't know what the evidence is. I try not to follow too many celebrities.
It was a movie set.
But they also charged the prop person, and he pled. Or she pled to something.
Yeah.
The person who prepped the gun.
Yeah.
And why they would use live rounds on a movie set is beyond my understanding.
So I think that there's the theory that I've heard and the sort of ideas that are circling around social media that this was a cheap production that they were doing out in the desert. They were trying to do an indie production, and we're hiring people who weren't certified or as certified as they would be if they were union gun handlers or something like that. Either way, if you watch the body cam footage, the woman that was the armorer, she looks like she works at Starbucks. She's like very young, purple haired girl, not to prejudice anybody with what she looks like. But she's freaking out because she's saying, I'm going to prison, I fucked up. She knows something was wrong. They had guns with live rounds, real guns there they were playing with. They were mixed in with the prop guns. So to me, it's like,
wow.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of stupid.
Film set?
A whole lot of stupid.
Movie set, yeah. I'm like, how can it be intent to kill when he's obviously playing a character? He knows he's an actor. The context is like not the same as most context.
Basically, if those facts are correct, there were some live rounds, some dummies, whatever you want to call them. Some
right.
Things, and you know that, okay, and you point the gun and shoot without clearing the fact that you have the dummies, not the live rounds, that would justify the involuntary manslaughter charge.
Yeah, and he's a producer on the film. That's the other connection they make. Is that since he's a producer, he created the conditions.
Right. So if he knows that and he still does that without making sure that gun is not a live gun, then yeah, you've done something that you shouldn't have done. That's involved. You can get to even a harsher crime than that, but you can get to involuntary pretty easy if you can prove that.
Didn't the civil suit get settled long ago?
Yeah,
it makes it interesting, right?
Yeah.
So oftentimes the civil suit will kind of trail the criminal prosecution.
They did civil first.
Mm-hmm. I just want to put it out there. If anybody's ever in that situation and a loved one is shot, please come to Bamieh De Smeth. We would love to see you. Mm-hmm. Well, not that we want that to happen to anybody else, but if hypothetically it happened because we're near Hollywood, if
you're Alec Baldwin and you shoot someone else, come to us.
No, I don't want Alec Baldwin. I want the victim.
He just sold his house in Long Island for $19 million. And they were thinking, okay, this is a sign that he knows he's in trouble. It would just be supremely ironic if the guy that was like roasting Trump goes to prison before Trump. Like, didn't he play him on Saturday Night Live before they got an actual terrible impersonation? Alec Baldwin does. Okay, one more case before I let you guys go.
What I know that you're looking in there.
We're all busy lawyers. What am I looking at?
No, 3 of us are.
This is California criminal law, cases, problems, and materials. Boring textbook, but it's got lots of great examples in it. And this one, I was, okay, so you guys can make fun of me if you want, call me naive, but I was, this case sort of shocked me in the reaction of my classmates in the law school, how sort of like they reacted to whether or not you would charge this person. So this is the story. And I think, Jen, this might correlate a lot with the kind of cases you see. Maybe. Isabel is a low-income single mother of 4 children living in Los Angeles. The oldest child is 6. The other children are 4, 3, and 1. Isabel has no relatives living nearby to help with childcare, and she cannot afford a babysitter. At 4 p.m., Isabel realized she had no food for the baby. Isabel decides to walk 4 blocks to the grocery store to buy food for the baby. Isabel doesn't have a car. She says to the 6-year-old, "Mommy's going to run to the store for food for the baby. Make sure you kids stay inside with the door locked until I get home." While Isabel is at the grocery store, her home catches fire and is quickly engulfed in flames. A neighbor sees the flames, calls the fire department, rushes across the street to help. The door is locked. The neighbor sees the 3 older children standing at the front window crying. The neighbor breaks the front window, pulls the children to safety. The neighbor tries to enter the home after the 6-year-old says, "My baby sister is still inside," but the flames are too intense. Isabel arrives home shortly after the first fire truck pulls up and has to be restrained by firefighters when she tries to run into the house to save her baby. The baby dies in the fire. Should Isabel be charged with a crime, and what offense?
Oh, I've had a case like that, not with death, but my client had a 4-year-old boy, 4.5-year-old boy, and she was Russian. Mm-hmm. And she left the boy at home while she went to work on like Tuesdays, and he'd be at home for 6-7 hours. And he'd watch TV or whatever.
4 years old?
4 years old, 4.5. I know. And she got charged with basically a child neglect, child abuse, misdemeanor charge. And one of the things she told me is, like, in Russia, we do this all the time. Like, America, you guys have this thing
of watching your kids.
Well, yeah, watching it. Like, this is we leave children alone.
Really babying them so that they're not self-sufficient.
Yeah, right. And then the funny part is, during that case, my oldest son was 3. And he got out the backyard and he climbed over the fence of our yard. And there's a park across the street away from us. And he walked across the street to the park to go play on the swings. My wife couldn't find him. She was in a tizzy, and she finally finds him like 20 minutes later when a neighbor brings him back to us. And I told her, I go, "Wow, I think you and my Russian client get charged together." And so a jury would have to find that the act of leaving those kids at home was a willful disregard for human life, or likely to produce great bodily injury or death. I don't know if you can get there on those facts. I think you can get there on a child abuse claim, though, of neglect, criminally.
Would you have to show in that example then that the fire would have also been a reasonable cause of the harm?
Well, let's say she left the stove on. Mm-hmm. Then, now we get a little closer to that. Mm-hmm. So, like, if I shoot a gun across the street right now in the park across the street from us. And I don't intend to kill anybody. I said, Dave, check out this gun. I could probably hit the post office from here. And I shoot, and some guy walks by and takes one in the head, and I kill him. People would say, hey, shooting a gun across a park with people in it is an act that you should reasonably know can cause great bodily injury or death.
Foreseeability.
Right. But in this case, going to the grocery store for I don't know how long, now I think if it's like an hour, hour and a half, we get closer, but that's the issue you would have. And see, now our reaction would be, what the hell is she doing leaving those kids alone? I get it. But do you think that it's a reasonably a belief to you should know or should have known you could cause great bodily injury or death by going to the store and leaving them at home alone in what you thought was a safe house? Now, if the stove's on, or you're boiling water for spaghetti or something like that, well, now it gets a little more.
I was just so what I was shocked about was just like the ruthless lack of sympathy from anyone in the room. Like everyone was ready to charge this woman
with what?
With criminal negligence was the subject that we were thinking about. Yeah. And it's just to sort of like I felt like the lone voice. There had to be others, obviously, but I was like, they really stacked the deck in this example. They're like, this woman has no one around. She like has to go.
Yeah, those are irrelevant.
Feed the baby. Like they're gonna starve without it.
It matters to a jury. It matters to a jury. She would say, if she were our client, that, and as the facts said, that her kids were gonna starve unless she could go to the store. She didn't have anyone, or at least go without dinner. Right. So the relative harm of leaving them alone long enough to run to the store to get them dinner so that they don't go hungry. Or how about just taking them all with you? That sounds like fun.
One dude raised his hand and said, "Well, yeah, but then if she took all the kids, maybe they are so small that she can't handle them all on the street, and one of them runs in the street and gets run over, then she's going to get charged with criminal negligence that way too." I just felt like
Have
it was.
Have you tried walking 4 blocks with children under the age of 6?
Yeah,
it doesn't go well in my experience with one, not multiple.
Yeah,
but it's also similar to there was that case couple years ago, it might have been in the midst of COVID, where the mom was working at Taco Bell and her daughters were doing their homework sitting on the sidewalk outside of Taco Bell because there was Wi-Fi connection and they didn't have Wi-Fi at home. And, somebody called CPS and said it was neglect and abuse and all of those things. So like, it's a similar situation where you're like, I'm trying to balance out all of these different things with what seems reasonable. Obviously, you don't assume your house is going to burn down in the 20 to 30 minutes it takes you to walk 4 blocks to the store, pick something up, and come back.
I felt that way, but I felt that there were a lot of voices in the room that were just kind of like, she should have known. Like this.
Well, and that's the risk of going to trial in front of a jury. People are extremely judgmental.
Yeah.
But then the first trial I was involved in was a public intoxication charge of a woman who was homeless and clearly addicted to alcohol. And the jury didn't want to convict her when she was clearly in violation of the public intoxication statute. So people can also be forgiving. But
sometimes it's surprising.
Mm-hmm.
I don't find they tend to be forgiving in their judgments of parenting choices.
That's what I was kind of curious about, because that's kind of what, because I can hear the voices of people in my family that just hearing this and being like, what kind of mother is that? And it seems like we're very ready to make judgments about parents.
That's the thing too, is like people, when they sit in judgment, always judge people at a higher standard than they hold themselves to.
Yeah.
and that's what always drives me crazy, because like I did a child abuse case once where my client sat at the table with his son. I think he was like 8 or 9 years old. And the son just basically tells my client to F you, and my client smacks him across the face and literally leaves a red hand mark on the kid's face. Like, it was a good slap. And I'm not saying you should do that, by the way, at all. But I'm thinking to myself, like the jury ended up hanging on that case as a child abuse, and
meaning they could not
reach a verdict. Yeah, it was like 8-4 for guilty. But like the 8 people who found him guilty were like, oh, you should never do this. You should never hit a kid. And I've never. Well, I have. I take that back. I spanked Sam once, but he had it coming.
And your tone
outside the statute of limitations.
Right. Yeah.
Well, it was on the ass. It wasn't on the face. But my point being is that all these people were like, "You should never hit a child. You should never hit a child." And I'm like, well, and the 4 who voted not guilty were like, well, we kind of understood it, and my parents used corporal punishment on me, and my dad would have smacked me across the face if I told him to go F himself at dinner.
Yeah, and that's a dividing line. That, I mean, I see a lot of like Facebook memes that are like, we used to hit our kids and it turned out better, because we used to hit them a lot. And I'm kind of like, ooh.
No, I'm not saying that.
There's a lot of psychology there.
They're not paying the therapy bills, but
right. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the judgment of people is so harsh about like, that has to be abuse. And I go, really? One smack? Is that really abuse?
I don't think they were able to come to a verdict on that Little League case that I brought up to start a conversation today. I think that the verdict, there wasn't a verdict. It was a hung jury because it was exactly that. It was like you have some people that were like, oh, he did what he needed to do to defend his child, and others were like, well, you don't ever push a kid against the wall that way when you're a 45-year-old man.
Yeah,
and it's an 11-year-old.
It's a bad look.
It's a bad look.
It's a bad look. Yeah. Let me tell you, there's been I've coached a lot of kids, and there's many kids I've wanted to like, hey, let's straighten out a little, but you just know that it's a bad look.
Well, I mean, it's back to the sort of, I don't know, the line between your emotions and the sort of like legal parameters, what you're allowed to do in society. And like your emotions are, when you see your own kid getting bullied by another kid, you're going to hate that other kid.
You are, but you just can't do it. You just can't do it.
I think we can arrive at on the podcast on a settled idea that you don't hit kids.
Unless,
but there are people that come to court and
there are always exceptions in the law.
Don't people come to court and defend themselves that way though? They're like, well, I'm a parent, I'm allowed to.
The law doesn't say you can't hit kids, by the way. The law says you have to use reasonable force, and the corporal punishment can't be unreasonable. And
that's disturbing.
Why is that disturbing?
I'm sitting here being like, you can't hit kids, and you're saying no, you can actually.
The law doesn't say you can't, is what I'm saying. I'm saying it's probably smarter not to.
That is a very lawyerly answer.
Your custody and visitation order might say otherwise.
Right. Mm-hmm. But like, okay,
it's not a good look in family court, in other words.
There's a big difference between smacking a kid on the ass and saying, don't do that again.
Yeah.
And then smack him in the face and saying, don't do it again. There's a two big difference there. And like, the one time I spanked my kid was, and it wasn't even a spank, it was a swat on the ass, I told him to sit tight right here. He was like 7 years old, and he tried to run across the street, and I had to grab him in San Francisco before he ran across the street. And I grabbed him, I smacked him on that. I said, what did I just say? I go, if that car wasn't going to kill you, I'm going to kill no.
We deal with a lot of cases too where kids are out of control and they need to be physically restrained so that they're not hurting themselves or other people around them. Right. So it becomes a really fine line. What's the battery? What's the hitting come in, or what's a restraining? Same thing in a domestic violence situation. What's the line between the mutual combat, the self-defense, and the aggressor? Mm-hmm. So when everything's happening that fast and emotions are so high.
Usually if you're using hands, though, you're not making a good decision. Now, if you're using knives, you're making a worse decision. If you're using guns, you're really down the crapper. And
if you're smoking salvia divinorum while you're doing any of that.
Those things.
Yes. Wow, that must. I mean, I didn't think of the angle on children that are having problems, behavioral problems associated with autism, etc. You must deal with that as well.
Yes,
sort of like how you parent a child like that seems like it would be even harder when people are struggling in court. God.
Well, we've represented a lot of families with kids who have special needs.
Yeah,
and sometimes. That diagnosis or their behavior is physically out of control. Mm-hmm. And so that we do get into that discussion a lot. What's reasonable? What's not reasonable? Did the teacher go too far? And has the teacher done that before? And then is the school liable for any resulting injury to the student? Or was it reasonable because we got to make sure that all the kids in school are safe?
And I was going to say, in my corner, you have sometimes parents who don't agree that that's the diagnosis. So you have one parent who supports it, works with the doctors and therapists and everybody. And you have another parent who says, this is not real. You've made this up. Ugh. And, for a judge to try and then say what's going on, that they can't really do that either. So then you're making a choice about which parent gets to make the medical decisions based on the information available. But I mean, those things happen all the time.
And what is the lawyer's role there? It's sort of like to argue your client's case, obviously, and sort of.
Yeah. So, if you have the parent who wants to be able to make those decisions, you have to give the judge the information to support that finding. Because normally, if you have joint custody, you have joint legal custody. You guys have to agree on medical care and, starting therapy, or if they're going to get a driver's license. All of those things have to be in agreement. In order to deviate from that and give somebody the sole ability in a conflict to make that decision, the judge really needs to understand why that's appropriate. And it's
hire the best expert. Hear from the neutral expert.
Well, I mean,
who is right?
That's kind of the lesson of the cannabis case in a way too. It seems like that they hired an expert, and then the prosecution expert agreed, and it was sort of like, well, once this has been established, it's kind of over. Aren't experts expensive though? Isn't that why part of what makes being a lawyer or having a case?
Yes, they are.
Yeah,
they charge more than lawyers.
Do people see through that though? Often the case, like when you put an expert on the
depends on the expert though. Like,
yeah,
the really good experts, like.
How do I become an expert is what I'm saying. And charge people lots of money.
Maybe you could be an expert in podcasting.
Yeah.
That'd be excellent for all of us.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.